If you spend long enough on YouTube, there's now a very good chance that a substantial share of your watch time is going to channels partially or fully owned by private equity. Major firms operating in this space have raised billions of dollars collectively from companies like SoftBank, Amazon, Disney, Goldman Sachs, and Blackstone, and they are using that money to acquire YouTube channels as strategic investments. According to my own analytics, where YouTube lets me see what my audience watches, some of these names should be familiar to you. Task and Purpose, Veritasium, Donut Media, Simple History, Fern, Fireship, Economics Explained, Mentor, Pilot, Futurism, Astrum, The Drive, and History Hit have all publicly been acquired by private equity. Outside of the nerd corner of YouTube, some of the biggest names in the space, including Cocomelon, Colin and Samir, The Theorist, and Dude Perfect, have also all partially or completely been acquired. These are also only the acquisitions that we know about because they chose to be upfront with their audience. There's no law requiring these deals to be publicly disclosed, and as you'll soon see, there are some really good reasons why they might want to keep it quiet. So why is this a problem? It's easy to say that private equity is just inherently bad, and to be fair, it's had some problems. But that shouldn't be enough by itself. Instead, what you should know is why private equity firms have suddenly become so interested in YouTube channels, and what this will likely mean for the future of the content that you watch. Big YouTube channels are really just businesses in the entertainment industry. Even completely independent creators still need to cover their own living expenses, and creating content does cost money. Film equipment, software, location shoots, perhaps a hired video editor, it all adds up. A lot of medium-sized creators barely scrape by, paying themselves fairly modestly. And in the interest of transparency, even this channel, which now has over 70,000 subscribers, has lost money most months since I started it. Anyway, all of this can be fixed with scale. As creative brands grow, their revenue increases while their costs stay relatively stable. At a certain size, most of these channels can generate strong cash flows and predictable profits, which should make them desirable investable assets like any other business, right? Well, not exactly. These operations are incredibly risky, even by small to medium business standards. Most of them depend on a single platform for the majority of their revenue, and these platforms can ban, restrict, or moderate their content overnight, often with little to no explanation. SunnyV2 and about a dozen copycat channels have built their entire career on saying that the algorithm stopped recommending their content, because it genuinely happens so often. On top of that, most of these businesses depend on a single personality to host the content, even if there's a larger team working behind the scenes. Human beings, especially those that share their lives online, can get burnt out, get embroiled in controversies, or just fall out of favor with an audience that outgrows them. Typically, the wealthy investors and lenders that give money to private equity firms for them to make their acquisitions would be scared away by these business fundamentals. But over the past 5 years, a few things have changed which kicked off the great buy-up. The first major change was that creators demonstrated their ability to scale their own brands to generate profits beyond sponsored segments, audience donations, and integrated platforms. Some of these brands have been very successful, others not so much. Even if Beast Burger and Prime Energy completely implode, they were a test case that showed that real brands can be launched through clowns on the internet. If that initial success could be paired with a private equity team that actually knew how to run a business, theoretically, then there would be some real money to be made. Another big push that's come from the fact that legacy media, which is large, centralized, rigid, and needs to be broadly appealing, is losing out to millions of individual creators who are flexible, can make content specifically targeted to particular audiences without worrying about tarnishing the reputation of a gigantic media company. These companies now have to fight for advertiser dollars, which are being split over more mediums than ever. Now, this trend is nothing new. Google has been the largest advertising platform in the world for more than a decade now. But another threat these legacy businesses are facing is the competition for talent. A lot of people would rather operate their own YouTube channel over working on something like an old-school TV show. Investors in these companies are worried about these threats, and they're putting pressure on company leadership to do something about it. One of the central focuses of Netflix's Q1 memo to their investors was reassurance that they are not having any problems finding advertisers, and they presented a better opportunity to creators to make their show through them rather than produce it independently. Other legacy companies have started taking a simpler approach. If you can't beat them, buy them. Even if the business case is not that strong, a company like Disney giving a few $1 million to a private equity firm that specializes in acquiring YouTube channels lets their executives say that they are prepared for the threat that new media presents. Appeasing shareholders is often a lot more important to senior management than making genuinely good business decisions, especially when an investment of a few $1 million is actually quite cheap. Before around 2020, old-school media companies were still going about this in their own old-school way. They would invest in traditional companies that just happen to have a new media digital-first focus. Think of businesses like Vice, BuzzFeed, Mashable, and Vox. These brands would build their own IP and primarily rely on platforms like Facebook and YouTube to distribute it, but behind the scenes, they were still operated like traditional media companies, with a lot of staff, city offices, and all the expenses that come with them. Which meant these were terrible businesses. They would burn cash, and they were much more expensive to acquire in the first place. Vice Media was once valued at over $5.5 billion. That's an unreasonable valuation for an organization that primarily distributed through a YouTube channel and a Facebook page. These are pages that get similar monthly viewership to Atrioc's daily clips channel. Now, clearly these are not the same thing, but one is obviously much cheaper to operate than the other, on top of being generally more advertiser-friendly. The channel Modern MBA did a deep dive into these companies and their respective failures. He did a better job than I could ever do, so instead of retreading the same details, I'll just leave a link to that video if you're interested in that comedy of errors. But the point is, the legacy media companies that wanted to protect themselves against a wave of social media by throwing money at it needed a new solution. Instead of investing in companies to build an online audience, they could just invest in private equity firms that would buy out people who already had an audience. And then there's the private equity industry itself. Over the past 20 years, the scale of private equity operations has increased from less than a measly $1 trillion to over $12 trillion today in America alone, according to Preqin, a data firm who are themselves owned by BlackRock. With this much money to manage, they've simply run out of normal businesses to acquire. New private equity managers who want to start their own funds are entering a very saturated market, and one of the best ways to differentiate themselves is to invest in businesses that nobody else understands. According to public releases, the biggest firms in the YouTube space have collectively raised about $2 billion and borrowed an additional $2 billion on top of that. So it's still quite a small part of the overall private equity market, but that's still more than enough money for it to become an increasingly large part of your home screen. Now, for the creators themselves, this is a perfectly understandable decision to make. Online fame can literally collapse at any second for any reason, so if they can sell part or all of their channel and secure that bag, I don't think anybody should begrudge them for doing it. But it will inevitably change their content slowly but surely over time. One of the things that made YouTube channels a viable investment in the first place was their low overheads. A team of 2 or 3 people with off-the-shelf equipment can produce content that would have taken a whole studio at legacy media companies. But when a channel is acquired by a private equity company, they become the overhead. The analysts, business development managers, strategists, and acquisition teams all need to be paid as well. This means that to maintain profitability, the channel needs to make more revenue, which means more videos, more questionable sponsorships, more products. The investors in these firms also want to see consistent and continuous growth, which means they need to play the YouTube game with low-risk videos that are guaranteed to do well with the algorithm, accompanied by hyper-optimized thumbnails. Ultimately, what this means for you is that the content you watch is going to become more generic and safe within the parameters of what will optimize retention. This also works with a private equity business strategy called rolling up, where multiple acquired channels will share management resources with one another. So if one thing works well for one channel, it'll be rolled out amongst all the channels in a portfolio. Now, independent YouTubers are absolutely guilty of this as well. I've personally spent many late nights making minor adjustments to my thumbnails to help my videos do just a little bit better. But without a bloated team that needs to be paid and investors that need to be kept happy, independent creators do have a little bit more leeway to take some creative risks from time to time. Rolling up and hyper-optimization is only going to accelerate a trend of every single piece of content on YouTube moving towards the same generic but effective formula. This is amplified by another problem that comes when the channel turns into an asset, which is that they typically want to move away from the focus on a single creator. For more than a decade, a channel like Veritasium has been focused on the host, Dr. Derek Muller. For a lot of regular viewers, Dr. Muller is Veritasium, but if you've been watching the channel recently, you'll notice that new hosts are slowly being introduced, so the whole operation isn't as singularly focused on one personality. The business case is that it cuts down on something called key man risk, which is where the entire operation depends on one single person to continue. Since Veritasium isn't actually Derek's business anymore, there's nothing to stop him restarting a new channel from scratch or just retiring, since presumably he made millions of dollars from the acquisition in the first place. For other channels, this has already happened. If you search "why I left blank" in the YouTube search bar, there are endless videos from former personalities behind big channels talking about why they're suddenly showing up on a completely new channel. A common theme among most of them is that it wasn't their channel anymore. Most of these splits seem pretty amicable, often with the old channel commenting words of support under the video itself, but obviously this is still a real problem behind the scenes. After losing their host, a lot of these channels have suffered from reduced viewership, and people are far less likely to directly support channels through merch or paid memberships when they know it's really just a faceless investment firm on the other side of the transaction. As this industry matures, we're more likely to see more onerous, non-compete contracts from acquired channels and a continuation of a trend towards commercially viable, predictable, and safe content over the unique and creative content that made YouTube so compelling in the first place. Now go and watch this video next to understand the real reason every sponsor you see on YouTube is kinda terrible. Oh, and make sure to subscribe so I can get acquired one day too.